We are very excited for this conversation. As someone who started my career in energy, only about 8 or 10 years ago, I started to be awakened to the power of the food system. Moving home here to Idaho 13 years ago, realized we had 200,000 acres in our county, and the vast majority was growing cattle, alfalfa, and barley for export, taking our water out of our county where we need it, and our rivers and our waterways for our quality of life and our recreation-based economy. And I started to research it and realized that our food system is responsible for somewhere between, depending who you talk to, 18% and 50%, maybe more, of our greenhouse gas emissions globally. So we need to transform it. It's not working for anyone. We saw during the pandemic, so the combination of climate change, the pandemic, and the Ukraine invasion created a havoc across our food system. And I think it really woke a lot of people up. In addition to its role in climate change, we don't have a resilient system just for food security, for food prices. And so we're really fortunate because we have a fantastic panel with us today to talk about how are we going to transform our food system? How are we already, thank you, transforming our food system? How are we making it decentralized, decarbonized, and regenerative? So first, I'd love to invite you to tell us a little bit more about who you are, your role in transforming our food system. I'll start with Elysabeth.
It's great to be here, everyone. I first of all want to say thank you to Aimée for an incredible program. I'm already learning so much. And really thank you to everyone here who cares about this, who's working on this, who's taking whatever skill set you already have and you're applying it in any way that you can. So I'm grateful to all of you. As she said, my name is Elysabeth Alfano. I'm the CEO of VegTech Invest, and we run the world's only plant-based innovation ETF. So plant-based innovation being anything that is working on replacing our current food supply system, which is inefficient and unsustainable, to have resilient, efficient, sustainable food systems in place. So the ETF invests anywhere along the supply chain in those good actor companies that are innovating to replace inefficiency. So that would be ag tech and innovation and technology companies and ingredient companies and flavor and texture companies, and then at the end of the line, the consumer packaged good companies around food. And then we sort of see food and materials are two sides of the same coin. So if you're producing less unsustainable beef, then you're probably producing less leather. If you've ever been to a tannery, that's probably a good data point for you that you're happy that hopefully tanneries are on their way out as well. So we see that this sector, so some of the stats Aimée was saying, just adding on her stats, 32% of the world's global methane emissions, almost 1/3, this comes from the United Nations Environment Program, comes from animal factories. You simply will not impact climate change if you don't address food. 41% of the world's tropical deforestation, animal factories. 42% of the world's clean water supply, also animal factories. So you look at that system and you say, okay, we don't have food security, we're not feeding people sustainably, we're deforesting, biodiversity loss, and we're emitting enormous amounts of methane and also nitrous oxide and carbon as well. So we see that when we put our dollars, and all of us here have a voice, and all of us here have our dollars, when we use our voice and our dollars together, real, immediate, just kind of building off of what Ian Monroe said yesterday, if you heard his great talk, building on what we can do with our voice and our dollars, we can make impact right now. So there's all this thought of 2030 and 2050. We can make impact right now. So this chart shows you the S&P 500 3.2 degrees Celsius temperature warming potential. If you focus on investing in those companies that avoid making the emissions, which is what we're doing. We're not focused on companies in the legacy old food system that are making emissions. We're replacing, so we're avoiding emissions. You see EATV, the ETF that we have, EATV, has a global temperature warming potential of 1.18. Awesome. I think maybe I'll leave it there because I just love this slide. It says everything. You can bring down your carbon footprint of your portfolio, but also this is the impact you want to make, and you can be making this kind of impact right now. So I'll just leave it before I pass off to the next person. If I say where we need more and more help right now, it's in building out that infrastructure of a resilient food supply system. And so everyone's enamored with the consumer packaged goods at the end of the line, but it's really that supply chain, value chain that we invest in.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And you can see when I met her a year ago, or a little less than that, how excited I was to have her come to the forum, because you really have been working diligently in the space and are really driven by the data, and I appreciate that, and creating powerful new potential vehicles. And as you said, we can make it also, we can make a change every meal. So 3 times a day, we can be making a change, as well as moving our money. So yeah, great. Well, Kevin, I'm so happy to have you here. Welcome. Kevin is CFO of Aleph Farms. And Aleph Farms, I've had the pleasure of knowing for several years now, met in 2018, and having been vegan for 20 years, was thinking, what about this cultivated meat thing? What do I think about this? Is this an innovation that we should welcome? What is this? And I did more and more research and realized this could be an incredibly powerful and critical solution to our food system needs, especially as protein consumption increases are happening across Asia and other places that have historically been more plants and less meat, but we're seeing these changes. So tell us more about Aleph Farms and where you sit in this food system transformation, please.
Absolutely. Well, hi everyone. Thank you, Aimée, for inviting me here. Such a pleasure. Such a great production, by the way. So kudos to you. I know we've been sponsored for a few years and we're very proud to be here. I'm Kevin Benmoussa. I'm the global CFO at Aleph Farms. Aleph Farms is a cellular agriculture company that plays into the food technology space. We're based in Israel. We are actually, with cellular agriculture, able to design new ways to create and grow animal-based product that not only help with sustainability, food security, but also animal welfare, while supporting a just transition to more resilient food system. We talked a lot about resiliency and food security, and that's really where we want to play into. Right now, our first focus is cultivated meat, cellular-based meat, as depending on how you call it. Our first product, pending regulatory approval, which we'll hopefully have later this year, in the upcoming months, will be to launch in a few markets later this year under the name Petite Steak, Aleph Cuts. You can see here actually on the picture some of the famous people that came recently to try it out. We have right here first Chef Marcus Samuelsson, which we just announced will be one of our partner investors as well and culinary advisor as we start launching the product. And of course, Special Envoy John Kerry, who stopped by on his way to do some briefing in the Middle East in advance of COP28. And as you think about climate solution, we're a big believer that cellular agriculture will be one of the tools that help us unlock the solution. We're not one single solution, but we'll be part of the solution. What I would say is, at scale, cellular agriculture has really the potential to help mitigate the climate impact. As a matter of fact, if you think about self-farming versus conventional farming, you have a much shorter supply chain, right? It takes us a few weeks to grow animal-based products through self-farming, as opposed to the many months and years it takes to raise cattle and bring them to the ideal age for slaughter. So that's really very powerful. There's also a study, an LCA done by CE Delft, industry-based LCA, that shows that at scale and using renewable energy, the cellular agriculture space is projected to reduce significantly greenhouse gas emission and land usage by over 90% and water usage by close to 80% versus conventional farming. So definitely you can see the power that this could bring as we think about finding solution to fight and adapt to the climate change that we're seeing. At Aleph Farm, we've committed to be carbon neutral, net zero, scope 1 and 2 by 2025, and then reaching scope 3 throughout the entire supply chain by 2030, which is ambitious, other to other companies, but we feel it is part of our DNA, and also we have an edge as being a young startup, being able to craft the entire supply chain from the get-go in a sustainable way. So that's really important to us. I think lastly, and then I'll pass it on to you, Sachi, but lastly, what I would add is, as we think about food safety as well, those new novel technology can also provide for really diminishing and reducing contamination, particularly for food, right? Because we're doing it in a controlled way. Traceability helps us as well, and that's also allowed for not using antibiotics, for example. So anyway, that's who we are, and I'd love to talk more about that.
Great, thank you so much. Sachi, so seaweed, Where does it fit? Where does Rootless fit within this food system transformation? It's such a pleasure to have you here, and I love your journey as well, having worked in climate deeply and now as an entrepreneur. So share with us, where do you fit?
Take us through the seaweed, the kelp forest.
Exactly.
Thank you, Aimée. What an
You're welcome.
incredible day, and what a privilege to chat about food systems transformation. I think, reflecting on what Kevin said earlier, I think it's important for us to ground in two things. One is this resilient, regenerative food system that we're building is in its nascency. It doesn't exist. We're literally building it from scratch today. And it's an all-and strategy. So I think Kevin's point of, cell-based meat, plant-based agriculture, aquatic, marine-based agriculture, they're all tools in a toolkit that we need to deploy at scale. So that's kind of the first grounding point. And the second is, we've talked a lot on this stage and in conversation about hope and possibility. And I have spent about a decade of my professional life working on international climate and oceans issues, think tank, philanthropy, nonprofit, and it is easy to get anxious. It is a doom and gloom space, for folks who are doing climate work. And along this journey, I discovered seaweed, and it was truly the first thing that made me feel like there was hope. There is this glorious regenerative food system that exists. The technology exists, it's nature. I am really interested in finding innovative ways and creating value and bringing these kinds of solutions to market. So I founded Rootless as a digitally native consumer packaged goods company in late 2020. I quit my job in climate philanthropy to try and get more people to eat and grow sustainably sourced seaweed. Very frequently asked question I get is, why seaweed? Why do you love it so much? Seaweed is one of the most nutrient-dense and diverse foods on the planet. So there are about 12,000 species. Each has a slightly different nutrition profile, and you can eat all of them. You might not want to, but you can. Each species has a slightly different nutrition profile, but broadly we're talking high-quality protein, dietary fiber, vitamins, minerals, trace elements, bioactives. And it's the regular consumption of seaweed that has been linked with reduced rates of metabolic syndrome disease in communities that are mainstreaming it in their diet, Japan, Okinawa, parts of Korea. One of the things I love about the seaweed nutrition story is that it wasn't created in a lab. It is literally one of the world's oldest foods. It has been used as a food and as a healing medicine since the beginning of time across coastal communities around the world. And the scientific and medical community is finally catching up as to why. So my call to action is let's eat more seaweed. I started Rootless, a digitally native company. We're trying to get, we introduced a product called the Daily Bite onto the market. It's a date, almond, seed, and seaweed bite. You'd eat one a day as you would a supplement, get that super potent hit of seaweed nutrition, bioavailable whole food. They're actually outside if you want to try some. And in the process, we are building and innovating across the value chain because this industry is in its nascency. And my kind of call to action in terms of what we can do today as consumers, as innovators, as policymakers, as funders, is get involved. And I think anytime you're thinking about food systems transformation, we need to have blue foods and the blue economy as part of that conversation.
Absolutely. I love them. Thank you for bringing them to us. So everybody be sure to try them, all different flavors. And it's just a wonderful, easy way to integrate such a healthy solution into our diet. So thank you for taking this adventure, this entrepreneurship adventure, which I know is not always easy. So thank you for bringing that to us. As someone who, as Elizabeth knows, lives with almonds and seaweed in my purse as my go-to snack, I'm a big fan.
Hopefully this is your go-to snack now.
Yes, now Rootless. Now Rootless is my go-to snack. Elizabeth, so where do we go from here as we're working to increase our move to more plant-based, smarter proteins? Where are we now? Where can we go? What does this look like, this transformation from your perspective?
I guess what I would say here, so I spend my time on Wall Street talking to them about an ETF, and the first reaction I get is, you mean there's a connection between food and climate change? That was nothing that they had wrapped their minds around. And then they hadn't really heard before that animals don't make a great business equation. So as I tried to bring together all the reasons, because I'm trying to speak their language on Wall Street, I feel like we need their capital. They're an enormous group, and without them, I'm afraid that we won't turn things around fast enough, and we do have a ticking clock. So I get reactions of, I'd never heard that before, and, oh, but this isn't regenerative, it's in a lab, or this isn't wholesome, it's processed. So I think my first ask would be, it's going to take all hands on deck. It's going to take regenerative and non-regenerative. It's going to take those communities who can feed locally, fantastic. But if we don't feed people in Africa as well, we're going to have national security issues and trouble on the political front of just instability, which, as we know from the Ukraine war, isn't good. So I would first off encourage people not to think one way or the other, but to think food systems transformation globally. Does that
great.
answer
And
your question?
well, one of the favorite campaigns I love is the Pulse campaign.
Oh,
the Bean folks.
Beans are us, or no? Beans is how.
Beans is how.
Beans is how.
Check out Beans is how. So beans are amazing.
Yes.
So when you plant them, as Aimée Mateus, who spoke yesterday, taught me, when you plant them, they regenerate the soil with nitrogen. They're nitrogen fixing. So they're great for soil, and they're great and healthy for us. And we have a great local provider of dried beans here, Thousand Springs Mill. So if you see them in the stores, if you're around town, they're wonderful. But I love the Beans is How campaign because
I love them.
It's one of the oldest proteins, like seaweed, a wonderful source of nutrition, and it's simple.
Yes.
And low cost.
And it's regenerative and it's alternative proteins. It's both. So I just hate to see all of us together who are trying to move things forward have infighting. I hope that we can get behind everything. For example, here's a non-regenerative answer, but think of how many people can have filet mignon. Very, very few in the world. Gosh, you start creating that special piece of beef in a controlled instance that has no pandemic risk, no antibiotics, no hormones. Now it's filet mignon for everyone. So all hands on deck.
Accessibility.
Yes,
and food security. And so Kevin, talk to us about how you're growing the company, because I think it's interesting. Some of your investors are from places that are very worried about food security. So,
of course. Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say, Elysabeth, I need to hire you as marketing person or spokesperson. You did a great job right there. No, I think there's a lot to unpack to what you just said, because I want to piggyback a little bit on that. I think the government you mentioned, I think you mentioned looking at different solutions. I agree so much about this, because it is not only about one solution. I think as you think about novel technology and food technology space, you will need different solutions. It's not going to be one silver bullet to be able to solve everything. So for us at Aleph Farm right now, there is probably two challenges, right, as you see it, in terms of accelerating the path to viable business model, which is, in a way, the similar challenge that the entire industry is facing, which is around scale up, first and foremost, but also regulatory. I would say on the regulatory side, it's less of an issue today, right? Today, you see, it is becoming so strategic for all the government from a food security standpoint. All the agencies are rallying around. And as a matter of fact, and I'm not sure if you followed literally the recent news, but a few months ago, we had two companies here in the US, two of our peers, Upside and Good Meat, who had both FDA clearance. And now this morning, as a matter of fact, a few hours ago, they just announced they got the full USDA clearance and are now available to sell in the US. It's a major, major milestone for the entire industry. And we're so happy for them, of course. And I think that shows that the regulatory and the government agencies, bodies are all behind this and they want to promote that. So that's number one. On the scale-up side, as far as Aleph Farm is concerned, we are actually right now waiting for regulatory clearance in Singapore and Israel, which are our two key markets. And then, of course, in the final stage of submitting our dossier in the US as well with the FDA. And we expect to launch commercialization in smaller scale later this year on the back of that. And I'll just finish with this. For us, as we think about scale-up, it's all about efficiencies. And I agree with you. I think there's a lot of let's say, discomfort in today's environment from investors around what is it going to take, how long is it going to take, but it will take time, right? And I think it's an illusion to think that company can solve all the issue and scale up and become profitable overnight. This will take time. As long as you get a path to get there, that's the most important thing, and I believe we have a path to get there. And last but not least, sorry, Sachi, is the partnership between private and public. I think government will have to play a role. We talked a little bit about that yesterday in our panel, but I think the more the government and the public agencies will lean in into financing the overall infrastructure, the better it will accelerate and help us overall as a sector.
And I think it's interesting for folks to know that a couple of your investors, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, one of their funds is an investor, and Cargill, the largest meat processor in the world, is an investor.
Absolutely, absolutely. Both sovereign wealth fund. We have strategics which also recognize the need and to evolve, if you will, the agricultural practice, and that's why they're behind us as well.
Okay. Sachi, where are you now? Where do you see it going? How big can Rootless go, seaweed go?
I want everyone to eat seaweed. My goal is to actually build a path to this 10%. So there was a paper that was published in Nature earlier this year that said if we include 10% of seaweed in the human diet by 2050, we can literally change the world. Just by the reduced agricultural burden on land, so changes in land use, we can spare up to 110 million hectares of land for afforestation, rewilding, carbon storage solutions, nature-based solutions. We can save up to 2% of global freshwater use. We can mitigate a gigaton of carbon emissions per year, again, just from reduced agricultural burden on land. We can feed people with one of the most nutritious, zero-input, regenerative, abundant crops in the world, all while farming 1.8% of the ocean. So this is game-changing. This is a game changer. And at Rootless, we're trying to build this path to 10%. It's interesting, Elizabeth, to your point about kind of being at the end of the supply chain. We're a consumer packaged goods company. I went in with the hypothesis is that everyone kind of knows seaweed is good for them. I'm just trying to get a way for them to eat it every day, eat a daily, kind of benefit from the unique health benefits that seaweed confers. But the more we've started to build and hit kind of revenue milestones, the more I've realized how early this industry is. So we are innovating across the value chain. We are innovating on health messaging around telling consumers why they need to be eating seaweed regularly. It is nutrient dense. It is a significant source of iodine, which is particularly important for women in their fertility, preconception, pregnancy journeys. It's really iodine sufficiency actually improves your menopausal symptoms if you're going through perimenopause and menopause. But we have to create processing infrastructure. We have to create some guardrails around what sustainably sourced seaweed could mean, because there is a huge economic opportunity we're sitting on today, and we have a time-limited window within which we can do it right. So we need to make sure the seaweed is sustainably sourced, responsibly harvested. We need to make sure that we do not make the mistakes we made on land with industrialized agriculture. So we are part of building this path to 10, and I think we're all part of it. And we're all kind of investing in the tools in the toolkit.
Can I make a comment to what they both said? So I come to it from the investment standpoint, and we're obviously an impact fund, EATV. So when there's a Boston Consulting Group study that said, if you're investing in green technologies, so alternative building materials, alternative energy, electric vehicles, or alternative proteins and plant-based innovation is going to be 4 times to 40 times more impactful than investing in the other green technologies. And primarily because even though we do need to build out that infrastructure, which is why I mentioned before, getting that infrastructure so we can scale is so important, it's much less than what the other industries need to build out their infrastructures. A very simple example, think about the person who has to rip off the roof of their house, and then they have to pay, and they have to put solar panels on, and they have to go through construction. Some might not. It's a lot easier to just let your fingers do the walking in the grocery store and maybe pick up Beyond Meat, or if that's not your gig, pick up beans and rice. Just think about the impact that your dollars can make. That infrastructure spend or investment goes a lot farther in plant-based innovation.
And to just add to that, I would say it's a combination, right? It's a combination of public-private.
Yes.
I think it's going to take everything in the entire ecosystem, both from, you mentioned, Aimée, strategics, which are very important as we think about upstream and downstream from a manufacturing point of view, commercial point of view. So leveraging the infrastructure, having them lean in. Also government support, right? As you think about tax incentive, public grants, and all the work that now you see happening on the DOE, at the USDA, and all of that, I think will be very much needed to accelerate the path to commercialization. And of course, private investment that will always be here to support the journey as well. So I think all of that will be necessary to really accelerate the path and unlock the value that it could be.
Can I add something?
Yes.
I think to the point of private investment, we need capital, and I think we need different models of capital. We need patient capital. A lot of the VC money that's coming into the space is expecting the same or similar returns to, the traditional VC models or kind of clean tech era 1.0. So I think we actually need to be more regenerative in our thinking of how to deploy capital in this space.
Absolutely.
Well, I have to wrap us up, and it's killing me because there's so much more to say. I mean,
There's so much to say,
you
yeah.
have to Google all of them, and I will just say that we have an article in Green Biz, the Aleph Farms, that we wrote recently about their net zero strategy. A couple of articles on that, and it's really for a company. There's so much on your plate. When you're innovating, when you're an entrepreneur, you're doing policy, you're doing marketing, right? You're educating consumers about the health of seed. There's so much to do. And so join in, be an investor, help tell the stories. But thank you for your leadership, for your innovation, and for your commitment to being part of transforming our food system.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.